Welcome to the show Brain Rot, What Our Screens Are Doing to Our Minds. Here are your hosts, Dr. Karyne Messina and Dr. Harry Gill.
Today, we are going to talk about something a little bit different. We're expanding our reach. Recently I wrote a post called The Duty to Speak, a Psychoanalytic Case for the 25th Amendment Commission. And this is a commission that Jamie Raskin, actually, I think it's a bill that he's trying to get through Congress. And he's talking about the need for psychiatrists and psychoanalysts and other mental health professionals to talk about what's happening to President Trump as it relates to the war in Iran. What are your thoughts about that, Harry?
I know you wrote a Substack, and I also actually wrote a Substack on the topic of reality that sort of loosely touched on when we lose a sense of reality, it's easy to begin to manipulate what people's positions are relative to more or less anything. In this instance, I think it's interesting and important to begin to talk about the consequences of loss of sense of reality. In some ways, when reality is manipulated in order to gain financial profit or personal success or even political success, in some ways, such as life. This is the world we live in. But in this instance, people are dying, and the global consequences are getting more and more dire with no end in sight. So a decision to do something that has consequences to people in Nepal that may go hungry, jet fuel in Europe may go out in the next 6 weeks. The food supply may diminish because of fertilizers not being available, as 1/3 of fertilizers come from that region. So you really begin to question the impulse control of a person that starts something that has such global implications.
It doesn't seem like there's a plan. You turn on the news 1 minute and it's one thing that's happened. Okay, there's a peace accord or ceasefire. The next, you could turn it on an hour later and a ship has been confiscated.
We live in a world right now, just focusing on that particular aspect, of two competing realities. There's a reality on the ground, which is the Strait of Hormuz is closed and Iran is not negotiating, and the reality that is being generated in the United States in order to maintain peace in the market, in order to maintain relative calm and not create an actual crisis. Chickens come home to roost, whatever the expression is. In the end, your reality does come because the physical reality exists, no matter how we describe it or try to manipulate it. But back to the 25th Amendment, when you really begin to worry about the capacity of the leader, and examples are numerous, but one of the most recent ones was a statement where he was talking about they have to stop Iran from keeping Strait of Hormuz closed, which they have done for years, end quote. It is not just a lie. It is a statement of factual incorrect, which possibly he actually believes in that moment of time. I actually accept that a person like that believes in their own reality. So combined with sort of lapses in memory and lapses in reality, as is being described, with incredible impulsivity, we do want to begin to think about the deterioration of the frontal lobe. So I'm going to go to neuroscience here and say, as we age, past age 65, we slowly lose volume in frontal lobe. This is well-documented, well-established principle of aging. Hence, we recommend people stay cognitively involved and do crossword puzzles, learn languages, take courses. And it is simply for the reason of continuing to stimulate prefrontal cortex and maintain the volume. What does the prefrontal cortex do? It makes decisions. It's the part of the brain that takes all of the inputs, meaning, and you can think of president or CEO or director of anything is ultimately the prefrontal cortex for the organization. So all of the inputs from occipital, temporal, parietal cortex that provide input about vision, sound, geolocation, it all goes into prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex looks at all of that quite literally on a work desk and says, okay, we're going to do this. As brain deteriorates, the decision-making begins to deteriorate. Hence the abuse of elderly. You should invest in this. You should give us your money because the returns are such. The deteriorating frontal lobe is less capable of seeing the scam that's in front of them. So elderly are victims of such scams because of the decision-making that's beginning to deteriorate. So deterioration of the frontal lobe combined with a lifelong confidence and belief that one's decisions are infallible. And I think our president has belief that his gut instinct is infallible. There's enough documentation that that's more or less how he makes decisions, is based on his gut instinct. Maybe when he was 30, 40, 50, those gut instincts and decision-making were more accurate, shall we say.
Yeah.
But as we age, anybody, or rather nobody superhuman, we're going to begin to make mistakes. And without any checks in place, and it seems like there are no checks in place, the decisions that are made are causing death, actual loss of life, not just by bombing, but if we really do enter the world in which there is famine, then we're going to cause death on a fairly large scale.
Yeah.
Hence, and you know that I'm very reticent to speak politics or render an opinion such as this. I think your position of, we need to start talking about this in a serious fashion. Here we are.
Well, that takes me to the Goldwater Rule. Now, the Goldwater Rule is this rule that was developed, put into place, etc., in the 1970s. And basically, the Goldwater Rule had to do with Barry Goldwater and something that occurred, obviously, way back when. I don't know that it was a law or a mandate, but it was certain, I guess it was a mandate, that psychiatrists not talk about people unless they personally examine them. And now I have a number of books, and I am not a psychiatrist, but nevertheless, I guess the idea was that it sort of should apply to other mental health professionals. However, the American Psychoanalytic Association sort of took them on about this and said it's a duty to warn the public. In other words, we have a duty to warn the public if we know somebody's homicidal, if we know somebody's suicidal, we have a duty to warn. But why doesn't that apply to a public leader who's causing harm? So I think people are thinking these days that that's antiquated, and what supersedes that law or mandate is the duty to warn the public that this is a real problem. And I think that's where the Raskin 25th Amendment Commission is going, in that direction. The very important duty we have to let people know what's going on.
To build on that, I want to be clear that this is, what I just described is not a diagnosis of any particular condition. It's a description of aging process, and to really make it non-political and to not take sides. I raised very similar arguments with President Biden, whose deterioration of frontal lobe was clearly evident, not just from the perspective of decision-making, speech, but also motor coordination. One of the things that frontal lobe does is it coordinates the movement of the body, and as it deteriorates, the coordination begins to deteriorate, hence the falls and the trips. This is not a political statement. This is a statement of, we have aging leaders that are prone to making mistakes, and when the checks and balances are not in place, dangerous things can happen. And the beauty of American system is that there were checks and balances, but they're fraying, shall we say.
Oh, could we say, just to play the devil's advocate here, What if a person said, well, if all of these things are happening to the frontal lobe, Donald Trump's frontal lobe, then could you say it's not his fault? How would you respond to that?
I think in an ideal world with checks and balances, there are forces that provide feedback, and the feedback is heard. There's a very simple principle in psychiatry. We call it, is the patient redirectable? So in psychotic disorder, a person loses a sense of reality. And if you're able to redirect them, then you're in a good place. If you cannot redirect a person and they're continuing with the delusion or agitation or attacking others, then it's time to start the treatment. And so in this case, what is a worry is there's Senate, there's Congress, there are approvals for wars of this magnitude that need to be put in place, where there's a consideration of a decision that's being made. And the system is put in place in order not to defer such a colossal decision to one brain, to one frontal lobe.
Yes.
So when it's deferred to Congress, it's deferred to many, many frontal lobes to provide as much thought about the consequences and the decision-making. Hence, the rule was in place for that particular purpose.
Yeah.
The power of any particular single frontal lobe can make a mistake.
Yeah.
And again, the aging is an important factor. I became a fan of listening to our Supreme Court deliberations. If people are interested, they're all posted online, so you can listen to the entire hearing. And it's very easy from medical perspective just to see which Supreme Justice is beginning to deteriorate in their mentation when they get lost in a question or they ask a question that doesn't really follow the discussion. So that there are no judgments here. We all age, we all lose function, we cannot continue forever. And the feedback loops are present to tell us, okay, you're making a mistake.
Yeah. So we need a group of people to make decisions, not one person.
Yeah.
And speaking of one person, we've seen the images on social media of this godlike healer. I think it looked to most people like it was Christ. I think that President Trump claimed he was portraying himself as a doctor, but there's something about that is pretty omnipotent, and to be the almighty healer, and then to say also, not in the same breath maybe, but maybe it was shortly before this, that there was going to be total death to a whole civilization that would be taken back to the Stone Ages. That's pretty, well, it's pretty terrifying, actually. But first of all, what do you think of this portraying oneself as a godlike figure?
I will stick to medical neutrality, which is, to me, I'm going to pass on the content itself, which is obvious.
Yes.
Would like to point out, the impulsivity is evident in multiple posts that are posted and then have to be deleted, or they're posted and then they're reinterpreted through other people. The spin is basically trying to create an alternate reality that skews from the actual data. And so the multiple needs to withdraw your post suggests that you're posting very impulsively. And it goes back to the frontal lobe. So no matter what's in the post.
What about this? If you've read too much, I don't know how much you've had time to read about the 25th Amendment Commission. What are your thoughts about that? Jerry Raskin's attempt to get a hold of this and get some medical people involved in assessing the president. I assume from both sides.
The problem that we're going to run into is, why was this not done with President Biden? And that's a big problem, because it would have been fair for both of them to be subjected to capacity assessment. They're just people ultimately. Our presidents are not kings, they're not gods. They're just people that we've elected to perform a very important function. And from that perspective, they're not just figureheads. They make very, very consequential decisions, and as such should be subject to medical review, as they are. So I think it's an important function when we notice that the leader is wounded, so to speak. When prefrontal cortex is injured, then psychiatrists are called in to help, whether it's depression or bipolar disorder or autism or ADHD or dementia. We come in to heal.
Mhm.
And in this case, healer is needed.
Yeah. Well, the White House has said, well, the president's fine because he's got so much energy. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, it's not just talking about it's as if there are people in a computer game that are being manipulated. Even in the war with Iran, it's doesn't sound real to a lot of people. There's a lot of energy in the reality of it. I mean, it is real, but sounds like a computer game.
Here's where we enter the territory where, without examination, I actually don't have an opinion. And this man has had incredible energy his entire life. It's the nature of his makeup to have a lot of energy. He's also, on a positive note, he's incredibly decisive, which cannot be said about many of our other presidents. So he's not shy and doesn't loathe to make a decision. The question is, are decisions now considered, or are they impulsive decisions? And that's a very fine distinction that can be studied and looked at professionally. I want to touch base on because reality is now one of my favorite topics, because we live in a world of complete loss of reality. So the proliferation of AI bots that create reality. This morning study of AI bots generating videos of demoralized Ukrainian soldiers that want to capitulate, want to give up. They're all fake. The proliferation of young AI bots promoting Trump and votes for him. All of that stuff looks incredibly real. In fact, across my desk came a Trump's tweet that he has Vatican files and he has the power to take down Vatican. The tone of it was consistent with what President Trump would tweet. So I got intrigued by it and I looked it up, and it was a fake post, but it looked very real, and it became viral. And in a world where most people get their news from Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, whatever else, Telegram, to take your pick, discerning what's real and what's not is near impossible anymore. So the twists and turns of reality create the world in which anything is possible. Real death of people is taking place right now.
I'm thinking now about malignant narcissism, just in general, or I suppose specifically. I mean, certainly some people have said that about or used that term as it relates to President Trump. And the idea of getting furious about things versus feeling upset or bad about them sort of comes to mind. What are your thoughts about that? And maybe if you just talk about a character, not specifically Donald Trump or whichever you prefer.
Not specific to Donald Trump, the type of leaders that are now taking over the world in many ways, our version of oligarchs, Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, Bezos, they exhibit the disregard for people that work for them, that are consistent with malignant narcissism. The world of a malignant narcissist is a very self-centered world. And if we look at all of these people, I wrote on this topic that the contribution to society ultimately is minimal. There are no great concert halls. There are no great community programs. There are no great homeless housing programs that these people have created with their billions. but to purchase Venice for a week, or buy another enormous yacht, or send a little rocket into space, this sort of personal aggrandizement kind of greed is very much the sign of the times, if you will. So there is in Jungian terms, there's sort of a collective unconscious zeitgeist in which pursuit of billions is the reason for being. It is no longer to do good. My Substack, The Death of Ethical Man, speaks to this particular issue. That we no longer live in a world where we want to be successful, not only for us, but to make the world a better place. The continuous drumbeat of nefarious things that Amazon does to price fix, to destroy retail, to promote their own wealth, the continuous drumbeat of collecting data, sexually abusing minors, the complete ignoring of the norms, the mores of any kind of moral behavior, as manifest in the country of France, wanted to invite Elon Musk. He was subpoenaed to testify about the use of sexualized images of children. He didn't even appear. He doesn't care. The Grok's ability to create pornographic images and share them to minors is apparently nobody's concern, because Musk is so powerful that Apple does not remove Twitter from its Apple store, so it can be freely downloaded, but it's clearly against the policies. They once upon a time basically ended Tumblr for exactly the same reason, but Tumblr was not owned by Elon Musk. So the lack of morality and the greed is global. I don't want to attribute it to our president. This is just the world that we live in. And is there a reset button? I don't know.
I was just thinking of a conversation I had with a patient not too long ago. She talks about Twitter all the time. I noticed she just did too. She said, "I'm never going to call that X, ever, ever, ever." So I guess people are scared and angry about powerful people who do things with total disregard.
Total disregard of privacy in the kind of ownership of mind that AI is affording large companies is absolutely staggering. And I don't think people are even closely aware of the might. When Google reads all of our emails, Google knows everything there is to know about us. And I spent quality time several weekends ago. It was probably too late because they already read all of my emails, but moving from Google to Apple, which supposedly has better guardrails, which I don't particularly believe, but I'm choosing to believe that.
Yeah, me
And
too.
when somebody reads all of your emails, just stop for a moment and think. Your affairs, your loves, your financial decision-making, your friendships, your most intimate details, your connections in the world, it's all somewhere in a computer, utterly knowable. And now AI is listening during your medical appointments. Where do you think it's going? All the conversations about your erectile dysfunction, about your difficulty breathing, about the headaches that you have all the time, where do you think it's going? So these are very dangerous times, and in combination of having malignant narcissists educate AI, these AI products are their children. So if we think about you're a child analyst from the perspective of a parent who's a malignant narcissist raising a child in their own image that is mighty and powerful, what happens next? So I'm very pessimistic, as you can probably tell. So am I incorrect? I hope I'm incorrect.
Well, I'll just say this plainly and simply. The American public, and I think we're both included in that, of course, are tired and scared. And we have leaders of various types making decisions that are not in our best interest. And they have very unpredictable moods.
I agree with you 100%. And I think that previous administration has introduced fear and insecurity, and that need for a decisive leader, which in many countries we're seeing out of fear of danger and fear of insecurity, people are running to strong leaders. It creates an opportunity for people that have alternate sources of motivation, shall we say, to come in and lead. Putin is an excellent example of somebody who came in under that kind of a scenario. And once he grabbed hold of leadership, he is unwilling to let it go and is willing to keep it by any means necessary. I think that the staggering defeat of Viktor Orbán in Hungary gives us some hope that even though after 16 years, that the country decides, maybe this kind of strong leadership that doesn't really speak to people's needs to end. But these are not uniquely American phenomena. As a European, I'm very interested in European politics as well. So these are sort of global trends and waves that we're in. What makes this particularly dangerous, if you will, is the might that has been accumulated both financially and militarily since the Second World War. So that's my very loose answer to your complicated question.
I just follow up with Viktor Orbán's loss. I've been following Viktor Orbán for years because it was part of my heritage, for one thing, but also because I was interested in how he got to where he was and how he controlled the country for so long. And I was actually quite surprised. I also wrote about him in one of my books, in particular, Resurgence of Global Populism. But I think it was a fascinating case, and I was quite surprised when I learned that it was likely that he was going to lose. I guess Vance went over for a last-ditch effort to help out, but people had decided, and that is it was a glimmer of hope for me.
The guiding principle is, we talk about reality a lot, and when people discover that they're being lied to and that reality is being created, they will go against the person that is lying to them. And I think the staggering lie of Alejandro Mayorkas in the hearing, when he said the southern border is secure, as people were pouring over the southern border, the reality was incontrovertible and lie was colossal. And these kinds of lies, they carry cost. Every administration lies, and the magnitude of the lie eventually determines what happens in the next election.
With social media and fake news, anything can be presented as reality. So that exacerbates the situation. I'd like to end with one more thought about the Raskin bill. If it's passed, do you think it will help force the administration to take a look at what's actually happening, we'll say, in the Iranian-American, I don't know if it's also known as the Israeli war? Will is it possible for anything to change?
You know me, and I hate the speculation, so I will not speculate.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to know because
Yes.
are they going to get the group together? Will the Goldwater Rule still come into play? I do think it's an effort that is worth thinking about, and I hope something comes of it. I'll let you have the last word. Any final thoughts?
Frightening days, frightening times in which there's actual genocide and ethnic cleansing taking place.
In several places in the world. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, until next time, it was nice speaking with you.